evening, everybody, or good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this week's TSV Zoom. And we are celebrating a very special season of Doctor Who, a season that had a story arc that ran for all 6 stories, and that season is the Key to Time season. And we're very, very privileged to have several guests with us this evening who were a part of that season or worked on that season. And I'd like to introduce first and foremost to you, David Warwick. David, hello.
Hello, hello.
I'd like to introduce Rosalind Lloyd.
Hello, everybody.
Nigel's hopefully with us, Nigel Plaskitt.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, hello.
Hello, Nigel. And I'd also like to introduce the Queen of the Costumes, and that's our very own lovely June Hudson. June, welcome to Zoom this evening.
Hello, everybody.
And straight away we've got a phone, which is a good start.
Sorry, I'm on a call.
So we'll just, okay, we're gonna, that's great, good start for us there. So everybody here has been a part of, the Key to Time season. We're going to come on to that in a little bit. But it hasn't gone unnoticed today.
Sorry.
That's okay, June, no worries. It hasn't gone unnoticed. Indeed, actually, I'm just picking up from Richard there. It would be Dame June Hudson, of course. I should be very official with it. But it wouldn't have gone unnoticed today that today marks what would have been the end of Tom Baker's era in Doctor Who, as he bowed out 40 years ago to the day in Legopolis. And of course, each and every one of you on my panel this evening has had the opportunity to work in one way or the other with Tom. And I'd like to start by asking each of you really what your memories are of Tom and how you got on working with him. And I'm going to start with you, Ros, as a starter.
Oh, hello. Right. Okay. First, so just memories.
Yeah, just general. I mean, obviously you met Tom, you were in the Pirate Planet together. I mean, just really, what was it like working with Tom?
Yeah, it was a joy. That man has so much charisma. I think there are very few people who have that. I remember seeing Paul Schofield on stage, and you can't take your eyes off him, no matter who else is on the stage. I met Lee Marvin once. My husband was doing a still shoot, and it was the same sort of thing. He looked down on me from a great height and said, "Well, hi, Rosalind," and I went like that. And the same with Tom. I mean, he just had that charisma. I loved his voice. I loved his laugh. He had his great bellowing laugh. Yeah, it was just a real privilege to be working with him.
And David, how about you?
Yeah, same thing. He was a remarkably charismatic man. My abiding memories are of having to do the Telegraph crossword before we were allowed to start rehearsal. So he'd go off into a corner, he and John Leeson, and get their pens out and go through the Telegraph, while Pennant Roberts was, grinding his teeth, looking at his watch, saying, "We need to start." "Oh, just a minute, no, got to finish this. I know this, 20 down." And so it was just an eccentric, basically, and I loved him for it.
Absolutely. And Nigel, obviously, your memories, please.
Yeah, well, I have a couple of things that stick clearing in my mind. There was his entry to the read-through, where he burst the doors open, threw the script across the room and said, "Who wrote this horse shit?" And the second one was a little incident that we had about halfway through the whole run of the thing, where he had a problem with a little dog, which I think probably most people who know about this series will know about. Those are the two things that kind of stick in my mind. But like the others, I can only say it's a wonderful thing to have worked with him, and how eccentric. Yes, he was, and a true eccentric,
Absolutely. And June, last of all.
Oh, working with Tom, fantastic, very amusing, but always making asides and remarks, sometimes outrageous, but people just accepted him as he was. Yes, he was very eccentric, but some eccentrics are terribly irritating and boring, and Tom wasn't ever. He was absolutely amazing and very, very funny, and actually very sweet. Well, he was very sweet to me. and he was someone that I adored working with, obviously.
Yes, of course. And we're obviously here celebrating Key to Time, and we'll talk a little bit individually in a bit more detail about some of your individual inputs there. But no mention of the Key to Time season would be without referencing the very lovely Mary Tam. And you know, Mary was introduced during this season and made a very, very strong impact as the companion Romana, and each and every one of you, again, in some way or the other, got to work with her. David, I'll start with you. You know, where would you like to start talking about Mary to me?
Well, I'll start in 1969, when I entered the hallowed portals of the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art as a young, naive northerner coming down to London. And I met Mary. We were both starting RADA at the same time. And she was a brash lass from Bradford with a laugh that you should bottle and make a fortune out of, an addictive laugh. So that's when I first met her. And it was lovely. So 7 years down the line after we'd left RADA, to meet up again and be working on Doctor Who. So it was like, you know, making a fresh, renewing our acquaintance. So it was great. And ever since then, until sadly, you know, her demise 10 years ago, or slightly more than that, wasn't it? No, less than that. She died. She'd have been turning 70 this year, I think, or 71.
Wow.
So, but she was just a delightful woman. She was irrepressibly good-natured and saw the funny side of life constantly. So my time working with her was just a delight.
And Ros, about you?
Well, Jason, you see, I only met Mary at the read-through because all my scenes were in the spaceship, and Mary was down on the surface of the planet, which is why she was working with David, because that team who were down there were a sort of different part of the story. So I really didn't know her very well, but I loved her work. I liked the connection between the two of them. I think Tom and Mary together were a perfect pairing.
Yes, that came across strongly on screen, and I'm sure you'd agree with that, David, as well.
Oh yes, absolutely. They work together really well. I think because I know a couple of other people who've worked with Tom and who found him, difficult's not the right word, but challenging, I think. And Mary, I think, gave as good as she got, basically. And he respected Mary for her opinions and her ability to answer back.
And Nigel, you were in the Ribos Operation, and obviously that was Mary's first story. What are your memories?
Yeah, well, I guess she was probably nervous too about going in and meeting all the kind of what was a regular team. But the one thing that sticks in my mind was and June will know about this, the white coat that she wore, which had feathers all around it.
Yes.
And a bit like the Ginger Rogers story, they used to come off. And they were getting in the mouth and getting everywhere. And she was kind of cursing this, what was a beautiful costume, but she would curse it, you know.
Well, it looked a bit like snowflakes, really, didn't it?
It did.
And it was just, I mean, it was suggested there was something sort of Russian, slightly Russian, and she was so extremely beautiful.
Yes,
that I just had to put her in something really striking, especially in the setting, which was in the snow, in this Russian type terrain. I thought that because she would be warmly dressed in this wonderful floating, warm white, not fur, but it was marabou. I just thought that I wanted to make her look absolutely beautiful, almost like an ice queen, because she had that cool, in the role she was playing. I mean, when you said Bracknell, that was not at all, of course, the part she was playing, which was a cool and elegant, aristocratic lady looking coolly down on everybody and extremely and overpoweringly beautiful. And she could certainly wear this outfit, which really took some wearing. And Mary could wear it and look fabulous in it.
She did.
Mind you, afterward, I noticed afterwards the other designers, she did, well, of course, it depends on the story, of course, but she didn't wear anything quite so elaborate, but it did actually call for it, didn't it? The script and the story called for something. I mean, what else would she have worn? Appearing, the first time in this wonderful, flowing, elegant outfit. I mean, it just called for it, doesn't it? And I love glamour.
And there's a lovely little scene. And there's a lovely little scene outside the TARDIS, actually, in Ribos Operation, where Tom's carrying the overall coat, and she comes out the TARDIS and she's got the beautiful dress on, and the coat just again adds to it. I mean, it's a beautiful ensemble that you designed for her there, and she did wear that so elegantly, June, it's fair to say.
Oh, she was so beautiful. You simply could not waste that glorious beauty. I mean, she just was calling out for something. Well, to my way of thinking, she was calling out for something like that. And I really went to town, and I was very lucky to get the materials for that big fluffy coat. And I did notice that the bits were flying around, but I thought, well, it's supposed to be sort of snowing or anyway. I thought, well, that's no. Anyway, it looks marvelous, I thought, and it's comfortable, and that's it. If everybody else would go.
And it did indeed. Nigel, you were in Ribos Operation, and you got the opportunity to work opposite Ian Cuthbertson. What was that like?
Well, it was a great thing to be able to do. I mean, I had two great kind of pairings with Ian, which was absolutely fantastic because, well, he was very patient with me, because I was probably quite nervous. One of the first big jobs that I'd done, and he was just brilliant at the whole thing and made me feel very comfortable. And I had him, of course, and I had Timothy Bateson, who I played a couple of scenes with, I think, and they were really just a joy to play, with these people, being able to bounce off them, and it was kind of a comedy duo, Ian and myself, and yeah, just wonderful.
I mean, it must be, I'm always interested in the perspective of guest artists who come into something like a long-running series like Doctor Who. Because you sort of turn up on the first day of rehearsals, and you're never quite sure how you're going to fit into the sort of long-running cast. What were your experiences, Nigel? And I'll come to Ros and David in a moment. What was your experience when you came into rehearsals for the first time?
Well, it's really only it was only Tom, and it was just Tom, in fact, because the incoming assistant was new, as we've been talking about. But the production team, of course, that were there all knew each other, and you just got the sense you were coming into something that was really, really well set and heavy. And I have to say, I don't know if this was George Spenton Foster, who was the director, who made it really comfortable for us, but he certainly did. The first day, I can remember, one of the things that shocked me slightly was that everybody knew their scripts. I'd read it a few times, and I thought, well, we've got 2 weeks, give myself time. But very fortunately, I seem to know it. I mean, it was probably shock more than anything. But no, they made us really comfortable. I can't fault it. It really was a great experience for me, And
David, how about you?
The first day there, I don't have a strong memory of the first day. Every day was the first day, really. I was wary. I mean, I was given the job by Pennant because he knew my agent. And I didn't even have to audition for it. It was sort of given out. In the days when the BBC handed out work, long gone. So you're always slightly concerned about, well, what is it they saw in me and will I live up to it? So I think every actor suffers from those sort of nerves. None of us are that confident about our abilities. So you just hope that you're going to do your best. And it was like moving into or jumping on a travelator that was already at speed. They'd done so many years, so many episodes. So you were having to fit in to a well-oiled and a constantly moving machine. And that was, but they made it quite, they were very welcoming. There was no them and us. We were all part of the same team, which was a great feeling.
And Ros, was it a similar experience for you?
I agree completely with everything you've just said, David. My personal feeling was, apart from being just in awe of this charisma that was Tom, was that being there at all was just something like a most extraordinary dream come true. Because when I was at school, at boarding school, and I was a prefect at the time when the very first episode with Bill Hartnell came on. You frozen? Are you all right?
No, we've got you.
Right. My job was to turn on the TV for all the younger ones, and they all sat there on the floor watching. It was supposed to be some program, uplifting program for us all, and I put on the wrong channel, and it turned out that we were all watching Bill Hartnell in the first episode of Doctor Who, and everybody enjoyed it so much they begged the headmistress, could we please watch that every week? So we did, and I sort of that claim to fame that the kids all enjoyed it and put it on. So to be sitting there in the rehearsals with these marvelous people, well, you can imagine how I felt. I mean, I've lived with that for years. So.
Yeah.
And like Nigel, you were also on Pirate Planet rather spoilt with certainly some of the guest cast that were alongside you, Tom and Mary, and of course you got to work with the wonderful Bruce Purchase as the captain.
Yeah.
I mean, how did you keep a straight face? That guy is just amazing.
I don't know how I kept a straight face, except I had a poker face on for the character anyway, so I just had to stay firmly in character. But I mean, he was larger than life. I mean, he and Tom together, I mean, those two characters, I mean, both larger than life, and being a tall man, and then they put him in these incredible platform boots, and I'm short, so it was a bit of that going on. So yeah, Bruce, fabulous.
David?
Well, I hardly ever met, because as Ross said earlier, our scenes were not together. You were up in the control room in the spaceship or the planet, and we were down on the surface of the planet. So our scenes never coincided, did they, at all?
No.
We were there at rehearsals together, obviously, but not necessarily at the same time rehearsing the same scenes. So we didn't do as much bonding as maybe I and David Sibley and Primmy Townsend, and I think that was it really, of the regulars, and Mary and Tom, of course, and John Leeson did. But so I didn't get much about Bruce at the time. It's only later I learned that he was a New Zealander, because I went off to work and live in New Zealand later, and everybody knew about him well out there, of course.
And Ros, you've got sorry, Ros, go on.
Jump in for a minute, David. When we were in rehearsals, were you there when we were rehearsing our bits on the spaceship? Because if you were, you might remember the wonder of John Leeson crouched down at the side of the set. And he gave his all as K9. So the scene would be going on, and there'd be John going, "Yes, master," and it was all going, and he was there the whole time. Do you remember that, Dave?
I got a feeling, was he not crouching within the set to let us know where K9 would be?
That's correct. Yes,
I think he was actually. Yes,
he moved around. Yes.
Yes. My first introduction to John Leeson was on his knees in the middle of the set. Yes.
Just a reminder to our audience that you can, of course, ask any of our panel a question during the course of today's Q&A. And if you'd like to post a question, please do so in the chat, and we'll select some questions to ask our guests a little bit later on. If you are one of those chosen to ask a question, then you will be asked, you'll be unmuted and you can ask the question directly to them.
Can I, oh, sorry.
Sorry, David.
Can I ask Nigel a question?
Yes.
Of course you can.
It's been brought up about the dog bite on Tom's lip. Did that happen? That happened during the filming of your series?
It did.
I do have this memory of him attending rehearsals with a bleeding lip at times. It must have been on the way to healing at that point.
Yes.
I remember that too, David.
Yes. Do you want me to tell you that story?
Yes,
I will tell
Nigel, please.
I've told it before, and Tom tells it differently to me, but and probably Paul Seed would say it again. But it was Paul Seed's dog. There's a pub next door to the rehearsal rooms, and occasionally we would go in there for lunch. And anyway, on this one particular occasion, Paul was already in there. I turned up and we joined Paul. Paul had his little dog beside him, who was sitting there, and in comes Tom and comes over to us and sees the dog. And he says, "Oh, what a lovely dog." And Paul said, "Whatever you do, don't say hello." So Tom says, "Hello." And the dog goes, "Rrr." And Paul says, "Look, I said, don't say hello." And the dog says, so Tom says, "Hello," and got a bit closer. And the dog growled a bit more. And on the third one, of course, it was always the rule of three, the dog bit him. And it just jumped forward. It didn't actually bite him. It just kind of reacted to him and jumped forward. And Tom was so close by then, it took a chunk out of his lip. So he's pouring, we're in the pub, he's pouring with blood. I think what happened was, because I had my car, I took him to the local hospital. This was the Middlesex Hospital in Park Royal. And there I am standing in the middle of A&E with Doctor who is got a chunk out of his lip and is pouring with blood and is not regenerating. So he's stuck there like this. And unfortunately, they did stop the bleeding. But going on to what David was saying, in the show, we shot it out of sequence. This was in the middle batch. This was the middle of the whole job. So we were doing the second set of rehearsals. The whole thing had been shot out of sequence. So when you watch the show, this little mark on his lip appears and disappears. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. They tried to shoot him, always with the right side to the camera, but unfortunately you can't do that all the time. And then he was having makeup put into it, which made it got infected, and it got worse before it got better. And I imagine that by the time he got to you, David, that it was pretty bad.
It was. It certainly hadn't healed, and they had to deal with it in the best way they could.
Yeah.
And I now remember odd moments where they had to shoot him from a different angle because it was either suppurating or bleeding or just swelling too much.
Yeah.
Eventually, it died down, but it was an issue, certainly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you remember that, Ros?
Yeah, I certainly do. I can picture it. It was very clear.
Yeah. It was quite nasty. I mean, it did look quite nasty, and it was just in such an obvious place that there was nothing they could do. That you just had to try and ignore it.
Makeup certainly tried their best, I think, but it was a little bit on the big side. June, just coming back to you, actually. At what stage in the production do you come into play from a design perspective for the costume? So you're given some sort of a brief. Is that quite close to production? Give me an idea of where that would have been.
The costume, yes. Well, I was sent the script very early, and the set designer, because I'm just trying to think of his name. It's dreadful, a senior moment. And George Spenton Foster were crazy about Russia, and so was I. And ancient Russia just seemed to me to be absolutely fabulous. Got everything, jeweled armor, which angels made. Oh, I mean, it was a designer's dream of fantasy and romance and handsome men, because Paul seems very handsome. Handsome men and beautiful women and lovely clothes and fantasy and mythology, and it was my dream, that production, that particular story. I just loved it. It was just wonderful.
It comes across, and it's very lavish. Ribos Operation. It's just...
and Ian, of course, who Ian Cuthbertson as Garen. what a joy he was to design for. I mean, for a costume designer, it was just incredible. That is the costume design for Garen.
Stunning.
And I was on a high the whole time. It was just such a lovely, lovely production, and marvelous artists and actors. It's something I remember with the deepest affection and gratitude to everybody that wore them. Strange and uncomfortable where they were. I do try to make the costumes as comfortable and to work, because that's part of your job. I mean, you have to design costumes that work for the artist and for the setup, because otherwise it's not believable, and also the actors can't give their best if they're uncomfortable, unnecessarily uncomfortable. And I hope that I have never done that in my career. Well, I've never been told I've done that, though occasionally some of those high platform things, but then it was part of the character, so one just had to do that. But what a fabulous production, and the artists, the actors just were simply amazing. And I often think about it, and what a glorious and wonderful time I had on it. Total indulgence, my dear. Total indulgence.
And as costume designer on that, did you get a chance to go on into studio, and were you there as part of the entire?
Oh yes, you're there all the time when you design the costumes. You're a supervising designer, which means you certainly do have to be there every minute to see what's going on. And there are dressers, of course, who dress the artists and look after the clothes. But you certainly are there all the time if there's any problems. But also, I mean, very often in the past, costume designers used to get all the costumes together and then just send them off, and the dressers just took the costumes and dressed the artists on vacation. That used to happen, but certainly in my time on Doctor Who, I would always want to be there and make sure everything worked and there weren't any problems. And see what it looked like too, the finished thing.